Hi, Laura Huey here from the University of Western Ontario. I'm a criminologist, and I happen to be a criminologist who studies policing, in particular, evidence based policing. And for those of you that have absolutely no clue what that's about, which is probably a lot of people because it's kind of a new thing, evidence based policing is about using research to generate better informed decision making in policing so that we have better programs, better policies, and better practices. So when the police decide to roll out some new intervention, we know that it actually works. My background, I'm actually a qualitative researcher, but I have done a fair amount of mixed methods research. Currently, I'm working on trying to improve our understanding of every aspect to do with missing persons cases. So, up here in Canada, but I'm going to argue more globally, there's a huge gap in our understanding of who goes missing, how do they go missing, are they missing or are they lost, what types of programs, investigative practices, search and rescue techniques, and so on are more effective than others in identifying and finding missing or lost people. And better yet, how do we actually prevent people from going missing or becoming lost in the first place? Qualitative research is fantastic for helping us to answer a lot of those very, very basic questions. So, for example, my colleague Lorna has been conducting interviews with people who, with police officers who do missing persons cases all across Canada. So search and rescue coordinators, search managers, frontline searchers, people in the canine unit, people who, this was a new one, who knew? Drones, drone technology, asking all sorts of questions about how drones can be used more effectively to find people who have lost and missing hikers. And of course, missing persons coordinators and general and homicide investigators as well. What works? So Lauren has been conducting these interviews across Canada due to COVID. A lot of this is on the phone. And what I'm doing currently is I'm reviewing about 45 different interview transcripts and I'm coding them. Now, coding is one of the least sexy topics in methods, period, whether you're doing quantitative coding or qualitative coding. That said, this is where the rubber really hits the road. And if you heard that, that was a little bark from one of my dogs who was clearly chiming in to say, yes, coding is important, even though it is not a super glamorous topic. So what have I been doing? I've actually been coding my Lorna's interviews. I've been coding Lorna's interviews thematically, meaning that I've been looking for themes that I can start to cluster the interview data around, and then trying to work out what some potential sub-themes are. So the themes that we're working with in missing persons is we're interested in training. Almost all of the interviews, officers talked about the training that they receive, whether it's search and rescue, investigations, and so on. So that's a major theme, training. Then what I did was I started to identify some sub-themes within the interview transcripts that are based on the type of training that they received. And what I discovered was that the type of training they received is relevant solely to the tasks or their role that they take and the tasks that they are expected to perform. What does that mean? What it means is that a lot of the police services from which we drew our interviews, turns out that they limit training to particular officers. So search and rescue, if you happen to be in a city where the police service, all the frontline police officers are trained in search and rescue, that would be exceptional. Why is it the case that training is limited? Well, what we find out from the research data is costs. So a lot of police officers spoke about the fact that there's costs associated with training, including pulling police officers off the street and then having to cover them with because we can't just pull everybody off the street. So they have to be covered, and they're often covered through overtime. That's something we kind of knew, but we weren't 100% sure. So these are the types of things that research tells us, or this particular research tells us. And it's the same thing. I laugh as a policing researcher. A lot of times, whenever there's an issue in policing, people say, well, what about the training? Why don't we just give them more training? Well, what these interviews are helping us discover is that it's not that easy. Oftentimes, there's not great training that's available. Some of the people that were interviewed talked about Canadian national standards. Others talked about using materials from the US, the UK, and elsewhere. They developed their own in-house training. Sometimes the training was limited to videos because, again, it's really difficult to pull, especially in smaller police services, to pull them off the street. So, we go back to this question about evidence-based policing and what works and what doesn't work. To understand that, we really have to do this basic research. I'm getting animated and tongue-tied. But what we have to do is, in many cases, we have to do the basic level research to understand the conditions in which police officers operate, what the strengths and the limitations are. And that's why qualitative methods are so helpful. The downside, of course, is you have to code them. And that can be a little bit tedious. That said, it's also a little bit fun to go back and to reanalyze, re-examine what people have said and learn new things. So that's kind of why I like being a criminologist, because we're constantly learning new things. So on that note, I hope you found this helpful. And I better run because I think my dogs are about to go crazy. Catch you on the flip side.